It's important we look at the facts. Why?
Douglas Ross is sounding pretty scared.
I believe in independence. And he clapped like a seal.
Hello, me again. Welcome to another Planet Holyrood. I'm Paul Hutcheon, political editor of the Daily Record. Joining me this week are Anna Burnside, the chief writer at the Daily Record, and of course, Ben, the editor of the Scottish Daily Express. So
I like the way that Ben doesn't have a surname like a supermodel.
Well, I think you have to kind of appear on Planet Holyrood for 5 or 6 times, Anna, before you get the Christian name treatment. You know, people will not know who you are yet, unfortunately, despite your amazing contribution. So give it a month and you'll just be simply known as Anna. How does that sound?
I love that. I'm looking forward to that already.
Excellent. So I think speaking on behalf of the entire press pack, sometimes in Scottish politics we long for a quiet week. It seems to be a forlorn hope, as we can see from the last 7 days. I don't think it's a controversial thing to say that the biggest story in Scottish politics is the scandal of the missing WhatsApps. So just to give you a very brief summary, there's the UK COVID inquiry that's going on just now, and it was revealed last week that the Scottish Government had not coughed up any WhatsApp messages to the inquiry, despite the fact that thousands had been provided by the UK Government. It was then revealed that the National Clinical Director, Jason Leach, had been deleting messages. And then the Sunday Mail, in a pretty amazing exclusive at the weekend, revealed that Nicola Sturgeon herself, who was First Minister during the pandemic, had also been deleting messages. So what's happened this week is that, sensing a massive scandal, the Scottish Government has confirmed that it's going to hand over 14,000 or so WhatsApp messages. And meanwhile, Nicola Sturgeon is refusing to comment on whether she has deleted any of her WhatsApps. So that's where we are. Anna, I think that describing this as a dog's breakfast would be putting it mildly. Yeah,
it's a mess. Thought it was interesting watching FMQs that's just finished, where both the Tories and Labour obviously thought this was where they were going to get a gotcha out of the First Minister. I actually didn't think either of them got a real gotcha moment. I don't know what I have not had a chance to chat with you about how you felt it went. I didn't feel that either of them got a real gotcha out of it, but it was definitely a tough 20 minutes for Humza Yousaf. I've never seen anyone so pleased to move on to a question about waiting times for breast reconstruction surgery for people who've had cancer in my life. You know, it must have felt like light relief after the questions about WhatsApp messages. But yeah, it's clearly not going to go anywhere. I felt that was just a beginning that we're going to be hearing. We're going to be getting very tired of hearing we're sending them 14,000 messages on top of the 19,000 documents we've already sent, which was the line that Humza Yousaf repeated over and over again. I think we're going to be getting quite tired of hearing that over the next few weeks.
Yeah, and Ben, yet again, Humza Yousaf is basically dogged by the legacy of Nicola Sturgeon. We saw it with Operation Branch Foreman bias. When I say legacy, obviously there's a police investigation into how the SNP was run when she was leader. The WhatsApp scandal relates to Nicola Sturgeon's time as First Minister. He just can't shake her off, can he?
No, he can't. I mean, this is, like you say, the Humza Yousaf for the first. I think the inquiries asked for WhatsApps covering the period January 2020 to April 2022. And for much of the sort of first 16 months of that period, Humza Yousaf was Justice Secretary and very much a bit part player in the Scottish Government. He was moved into the health post in May 2021. And then obviously he did start to play a role, particularly in the COVID recovery. But he wasn't a key player during the COVID pandemic. He may have been a minister. It was Nicola Sturgeon. It was the Nicola Sturgeon show. John Swinney, Jean Freeman, and some of the key advisors as well, most notably Jason Leach, were the main people involved. And yet Humza Yousaf finds himself carrying the can and trying to explain their actions. He keeps saying that and Shona Robison, the Deputy First Minister, said the same on Tuesday, that they're legally unable to disclose who's given what to the inquiry, which is, it's kind of a fig leaf, really, because at the same time, Humza Yousaf himself has disclosed what he's given to the inquiry. Kate Forbes has said what she's given to the inquiry. People can disclose their own personal submissions. They're just not allowed to disclose other people's submissions. So Humza Yousaf's desperately covering up, whereas Nicola Sturgeon could put an end to this in one brief interview by just telling us whether A, she deleted her messages, and B, whether any remain to be sent to London. I think one of the key points as well, I was just talking about the timeline there. I'm given to understand from Amar Anwar, the Council for the Scottish Bereaved Group, that the legal kind of responsibility to retain these messages began on the day that Nicola Sturgeon announced the public inquiry, and that was in August 2021. Mm-hmm. So it may be that the bulk of the emergency was over by then, but there's still almost a year's worth of messages that should have been protected legally, should not have been deleted. And it seems that these have gone as well. We just don't know. I think it's a huge scandal. The First Minister's kind of put his neck on the line. He's got two fresh claims that he's misled Parliament, all to protect his predecessor. It's he must rue the day that he ever agreed to become the continuity candidate.
Do you know, I think, Ben, are we reaching the point where he's going to throw Nicola under the bus? Because what struck me so far with branch form and now WhatsApp scandal is that he still feels this instinctive loyalty towards her.
I don't think he can throw her under the bus. I think he'd be throwing himself under. They're so closely linked. At the moment, there's you couldn't put cigarette paper between them, whereas Kate Forbes did offer a real alternative, even though arguably she was closer to Nicola Sturgeon when she was actually in government. The fact that Humza Yousaf set his stall out as, I'm going to carry on all the good work, I'm going to build on all this good work. If he then throws her under the bus, he's essentially saying, okay, right, I was completely 100% mistaken, and my first 6 months in office have been built on, built on foundations of sand.
But he could say, for instance, I have a deep respect for my predecessor, but transparency is important in this UK COVID inquiry, and I think she should answer the question on whether she deleted any messages. You could quite easily say that.
He could very easily say that. I have no idea why he doesn't, other than the culture of cover up and secrecy that is the sort of first resort in the Scottish government rather than the last resort, in my opinion.
Anna, just on the messages themselves, you can see if people are sending WhatsApps to each other, say it's sensitive details of constituents' health, and also, would you like a coffee? Yes, go and get me one. You can see why that sort of thing would be deleted. But as soon as the First Minister indicates that there's going to be a public inquiry and then formally announces it, surely it's got to be the case that everything has to be held. Then you transfer everything to the COVID inquiry, and then they decide what is relevant. You can't have a situation where the politicians are deciding the SIFT themselves and they're deciding what is relevant.
Yeah.
Isn't this at the core?
I mean, that's the very point that Anas Sarwar was making in FMQs, wasn't it? That it's not for the SNP or the government or anyone to make those decisions. I mean, I have to say I'm quite surprised at the way that Nicola Sturgeon has, some of the ways that Nicola Sturgeon has handled this, because she's such a lawyer and she's so cautious. And, you know, as much as anyone must have realised the implications of and the status and the importance of all the documentation, all the records keeping around about COVID. And I still haven't quite squared that circle with myself, like why someone whose whole modus operandi was based around being cautious, that was why she would proceed. I would welcome anyone's insight on that.
Well, I mean, what I was going to just lead into there, Anna, is that the reason I think this is the political dangers for Humza are obvious, but in terms of Nicola's legacy as well, you know, the deletions might relate to the most innocuous things, but if we can never retrieve these, if there's no way, there's always going to be this suspicion that she was.
It's a vacuum, isn't it?
Yeah.
And everyone always fills a vacuum with the worst case. That's what's so dangerous about them. Everyone will fill a vacuum with the worst case scenario. I mean, we could have been spending the last 11 minutes, speculating about WhatsApps that really are just like, when will we go for coffee?
Yeah. Isn't that right, Ben? I mean, there's this, if there are messages that are deleted forever, the questions will never stop being asked.
Well, I think, I've been fascinated. I'm sure we've all been fascinated by some of the WhatsApps submitted by the UK government, Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings. And in fact, some of the most telling insights are from these seemingly innocuous. We were saying about going for a coffee. What if Nicola Sturgeon was sending Jason Leach for a coffee? There are the casual conversations are almost as important as the serious decision making on the record conversations. What was the tone? What were they saying to each other? Were they in? We've heard a lot this week about the UK government kind of insulting the Scottish government in its private chats. Was the same happening here? And if the Scottish government are allowed to redact and select their own WhatsApps, then we're not going to get that. We're not going to get the sort of throwaway line that tells you actually a great deal about the situation, about who was in charge, about who was really making the decisions and what the priorities were. And I mean, the other point of it all is, I've got WhatsApp on I've got two phones. I've got a work phone. I've got WhatsApp on them both. I've never had cause to delete a WhatsApp conversation in 10 years. Why would you even do it? It takes up such a little amount of storage on your phone's database. You can get almost unlimited storage for 99p a month from your service provider. Why would you delete WhatsApps? No, who deletes WhatsApp? Am I crazy? Is this a thing that anyone else does?
Maybe Nicola Sturgeon was passing judgment on her predecessor, Alex Salmond. Who knows? There might be all sorts of things that she wouldn't want to see in the public domain.
Oh, absolutely. Because that's what's interesting, isn't it? Because we know she's a cautious person. So what side is she being cautious on? Has she made a calculated decision that it's better to delete things that are really incriminating and face what's happening now than to keep them and release them and face the music or have the consequences of what was in them? That's the really chewy bit, isn't it?
That's the only reasonable explanation that you could draw from this. It really is.
And she's someone that does. She's not an idiot like Cummings and is with those absolutely, unguarded stream of, stream of filthy consciousness, ranty messages. She's the opposite of that. She would not, under any circumstances, send messages like that. So, if she's taken a decision that it's worth deleting them, that then really begs the question about what was in them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's implausible that Nicola has called Jason Leach a fuck pig.
I mean, if she had, we want to know, and also if they had an if anyone had a nickname that then was reduced to an emoji. I mean, I just wrote a column about this week about how seductive WhatsApp is, and how you can see why people like Cummings and Kane, Lee Kane, the number 10 comms advisor, why they got into a situation where they were sending these kind of messages, because it is very seductive. It's so quick and instant, and if you like that kind of thing, fun, to send snarky messages. I would completely 100% put my hand up to that. And that, but when you're doing it on government time with the stakes as high as they were, that this is the situation you end up in, the situation that they're in. But that's what's so intriguing about that is, that's not how Sturgeon operates at all. I don't see her sending anyone, using a shopping trolley emoji as a jokey stand-in for anybody's, nickname. So what was it that was in there that's made her, change those settings?
Just two final points I would make. In summary, fair play to Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar, who very effectively set a trap for the First Minister on this issue at FMQs a number of months ago. I think the Scottish Government has fallen into the trap. Secondly, I mean, most stories blow over within a few days. I think we can all accept that this one is not going to blow over within a few days, that we'll probably still be talking about this in the weeks and months to come. Just moving on, back to Anas. Now, as I was saying a couple of weeks ago, I don't particularly want to get into the weeds of the bloodshed in the Middle East, but in relation to Labour, there is definitely a split between Anas Sarwar and Keir Starmer on the situation in Gaza. Keir gave a very poor interview to LBC last month, in which he appeared to suggest that Israel had the right to cut off water and electricity to the people of Gaza. And it took him a few days to backtrack on that. Anas was furious with those comments. I did an interview with him earlier this week in which he said that Keir's comments had caused a lot of hurt in the Muslim community. And I had another story today, a leaked account of a meeting in which Anas had gone further and said that the words had lacked empathy and humanity. Ben, do you get the impression that this issue is ripping Labour apart?
It's a problem, and it's one that could have been managed much better. Labour, I think Labour have been in, on a roll for so long. They've been on an upward trajectory. The conference had gone well. Everything seemed to be just rolling inevitably towards Downing Street, and perhaps they became a bit complacent. Perhaps some of the comms team and the advisors became a bit complacent and didn't anticipate that this was an issue that really does have to be handled with great care. I don't think it's going to rip Labour apart, though. I think Keir Starmer's managed to roll back. I think they'll all, both Anas Sarwar, Keir Starmer and Sadiq Khan, Andy Burnham, will realise that the bigger picture is the important thing here. I think some of Labour's opponents would like to portray it as an issue that's tearing him apart, and a kind of new. I've seen some people trying to compare it to Tony Blair and the Iraq War, which just seems crazy. But it's not a good look. But I think it's something that, given that they're still in opposition, maybe it's happened at a good time. This would be a lesson learned that international affairs can trip you up very, very quickly.
Yeah, and Anna, I mean, I've written about this. Keir and Anas have got a good relationship. They work closely together. Their offices work closely together. Anas's team has been working with Keir Starmer's office on the first 100 days of a Labour government. And so if we just sort of hone in on the differences in their position, Keir Starmer is supporting a humanitarian pause, whereas Anas is calling for a full ceasefire. I mean, what do you make of the differences between those positions?
I think they're playing to different constituencies. I think Starmer is very much positioning himself as different from Jeremy Corbyn. I think this is actually because the Hamas connection was one of the really toxic things that those of a Daily Mailish mindset could cast up against Corbyn, that he was friends with the likes of Hamas. So I think Starmer is trying to put very clear blue water between himself and any notes of Corbynishness. And then I also just think he's, in a broader sense, just trying to present himself as really sensible, statesmanlike, considered leadership, grown-up, sensible leadership material. I think Sarwar's got a slightly different job to do. I think he's thinking of different things. He's thinking about obviously Muslims, Muslim Labour voters. That was historically a big tranche, a big sector of the population that was kind of automatic Labour supporters. He's thinking of them. He's thinking of party activists who he has to motivate and who are going to be out delivering the leaflets and blah blah blah. He's addressing them as much as voters and the wider audience. So I think the two leaders have got different constituencies there that they're addressing, and that Starmer is distancing himself. It's a clear way for Starmer to distance himself from the party's legacy. I mean, can you imagine the headlines if he had done anything that could be remotely seen as giving a millimetre to Hamas? It would be straight back, and he's Corbyn,
just to cut in, imagine Corbyn, Anna. Imagine Corbyn had been leader just now.
Well, exactly. So I think that's what Starmer has in his mind, and he's thinking, what would Corbyn do, and doing the opposite. I think so, and yeah, I mean that's my take on it.
Ben, just last thing on Israel, Gaza, and Labour. Do you think voters will sympathise more with the Starmer position or with the Sarwar position?
I was just going to point out there, Anna, that's excellent advice to live by in general. If you think to yourself, what would Corbyn do, and do the opposite. I don't know. I mean, I think, again, just looking ahead to if Keir Starmer does become Prime Minister, this is, this is the arena Labour have to find themselves in now. They've got to stick with NATO. They've got to stick with the other EU and Western nations. They've got to keep Washington happy. Got to keep, Tel Aviv on side. Labour, Starmer's position seemed to echo a lot of the other Western leaders, and the UK can't find itself out of step on global affairs. If Labour does win, as to which, I don't know. I mean, it's such a emotive subject that it's difficult to know. I mean, it very much depends on your own views on the conflict and the crisis, and as to who you would most have, align yourself with and have sympathy with. I mean, I think again, without wanting to get into the weeds of it too much, the problem with the ceasefire call is that it kind of sounded like it was calling for an Israel ceasefire and not a Hamas ceasefire. The way it was presented was that Israel has to stop bombing Gaza, but Hamas doesn't have to stop firing rockets back at Israel.
That was one of my questions. How do you get a terrorist group to abide by a ceasefire? I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, exactly. This is what Israel says.
Yeah, they don't go to the UN and have, where are your sanctions there?
No,
but I mean, they are the rule. They do run. They are essentially the government of Gaza.
Still on Labour, Anna, this new opinion poll this morning. Obviously, we've been talking about Labour tensions, but it doesn't seem to be reflected in the polls. Once you strip out undecideds, in terms of Scottish voting intentions for the general election, Labour 38, SNP 32. I mean, that's an incredible turnaround.
It is. It
Compared
is.
to 2019, the last decade or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it shows that I don't see this, maybe I'll be proved wrong. I don't see that the Gaza issue would cut through there. I don't think that's a voting issue. I can't see anyone, especially in the current economic crisis and so on, thinking, but Keir Starmer called for didn't call for a ceasefire. So actually, no, I'm not going to vote for them. So I don't think that's going to happen. Yeah, I think this is really encouraging for Labour. It looks pretty solid. I mean, and I think if you drilled into the figures, there were some really interesting, numbers in there. The one that jumped out for me was that only 55% of people who voted SNP in 2019 are planning to vote for them in a general election next year. I mean, that's ouchy, isn't it? And that's a really whoa number for them. That's a technical, obviously psephological term, for them to have to come to terms with.
And it's not getting any better. I mean, who knows how branch form is going to be resolved, but it's going to be resolved one way or the other. You've got the WhatsApp scandal. You've got a very difficult budget where cuts are going to be pushed through, and Labour will pin that on the SNP. I mean, Ben, the patterns are clear. Labour is on the way up in Scotland. The SNP are hitting the ground. And some of these sort of wilder predictions that we've seen, maybe of Labour winning over 25 seats, over 30 seats, I mean, that is now looking kind of doable, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I wonder if the thinking at the SNP is already starting to move on to, right, let's write off the general election. What do we do to bounce back from that and ensure we're in a position to challenge to stay in power at Holyrood? The polls have been, moving this way for so long. They were borne out in Rutherglen and Hamilton West. I just think perhaps the SNP is starting to think, let's swallow this and move on. I mean, there's a school of thought that the surge in support for Labour are SNP voters who think, or who've recognised, right, we've just had enough of the Tories, we want them out, and the only way to do that is to vote Labour. It doesn't mean they've gone back to Labour permanently, but they're prepared to vote Labour in the general election to get the Conservatives out of power. Do they then move back to the SNP for the Holyrood elections and further subsequent elections, or do they stick with Labour for 4 years, 8 years, whatever it might be? It almost feels like the debate's kind of settled. Do you think
Express readers in Scotland who are living in SNP Labour marginals, Ben, do you think they will, obviously they might be Tory leaning, do you think they would go Labour at the next election?
Well, I think we saw a poll where, funnily enough, actually the majority of, or most Express readers are Labour voters. I think
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
I think it was only the Daily Mail that had most Conservative voters. Even like the Telegraph had most Labour. But anyway, I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will. I think Conservative-leaning voters are more likely to tactically vote in a way.
they're probably more focused on the union and getting the SNP out, whereas I think Labour voters would really struggle.
There's a lot of Labour voters who could be a die-hard unionist, but they might think twice about voting Conservative in those areas where the Conservatives are in power or are the closest challenger. I think that's always the problem with tactical voting. It doesn't always kind of pay off. But yeah, clearly, I mean, as we saw in Rutherglen and Hamilton West, I think a lot of did the Tory vote drop from 9,000 to 1,000, something like that?
Exactly. I thought that was a fascinating bit of the by-election. Anna, let's go to you. Good week, bad week?
Okay, good week. I've picked Lorna Slater, who at the Greens conference in Dunfermline announced that there was going to be a tax on cruise ship emissions. And I just thought, well, finally, some green policies coming through from the Green Party, because, despite them being junior members of the coalition government, we haven't seen much that you could actually badge as green, certainly successfully happening. So I think that's a good policy. I think cruise ships are big old environmental enemies. I think the places where they dock see very little benefit. The passengers come off the ships and go into buses to be taken to prettier parts of Scotland immediately. So it would be good for those areas. I'm thinking especially maybe of places like Greenock and Leith to see some benefit from that. So yeah, I think that's good. Good week. Go Lorna. Bad week. I have picked Ash Regan, the MSP who stood for leadership of the Scottish National Party, came third and has now left and defected to join Alba. We see her here with the two Alba MPs. None of these people stood to be elected on an Alba ticket. They were all SNP people who had defected. And I really think that standing for a leadership of a party and not getting it and then bailing out, I think that's an extremely bad look. So that's why I have picked bad week for her.
Ben, how about you?
A bit more predictable, I'm afraid. Good week. Douglas Ross. I thought he was very quick to kind of kickstart the WhatsApp scandal at First Minister's questions last week. No sooner had Jamie Dawson, the lead counsel to the inquiry, kind of made these claims or revelations at the hearings in London than well done to Douglas and the Tory press office. They were right on it. They had the questions and they really caught Humza Yousaf off guard. I had forgotten actually that Anas Sarwar did sort of lay the original trap with his question in June. So a good sort of unionist tag team effort there. But I thought Douglas Ross has been bang on it on the WhatsApp scandal. And bad week, same topic. My bad weeks only ever seem to be one of two or three people, and we're back to Nicola Sturgeon, and for obvious reasons, namely the fact that she appears to have deleted most of her WhatsApp messaging from the COVID pandemic, and I think 4 times during the press huddle refused to answer the question.
Yeah, I was there. It was 4 times at least.
4 times at least. How does she's clearly been through some a bit of a political roller coaster this year, but this is another one where you look and you think, I mean, does she really want to hang on for another 3 years on the back benches putting up with this?
I know, I was thinking that, Ben. It's like it would be a lot easier for herself and for Humza if she just maybe stood down at the next general election next year. Because, you know, Holyrood is just dominated by huddles with Nicola, just waiting for her to speak on various issues. But that's where we are. So I think that wraps it up for another week. I'm willing to bet a fiver that in the next Planet Holyrood we will be discussing WhatsApps yet again. So thanks to Ben, thanks to Anna, and thanks to our producer Daryl Devine. That's his real name, that's not a porn name. So hope to see you again next week.
It's important we look at the facts. Why? Why?
Douglas Ross is sounding pretty scared.
I believe in independence.
And he clapped like a seal.